Make sure to give my dad a 5-star review.
Make sure to like and subscribe to his YouTube. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Where they're trying to promote themselves as opposed to promote what they're against. I mean, we used to think of Turning Point as being against all the things that I listed before, all the isms and ideologies that Trump is fighting. But I think now that they have a moment with the broader public, they've been trying to promote it as faith, family, and freedom. And they get away from that at times, but I really think they're trying, they really have a story to tell about themselves now that they didn't perhaps before.
Hey, welcome back, Faithful Politics listeners and watchers. I am your political host, Wright, and your faithful host, Pastor Josh Burtram, is not here today. He's off doing things only a pastor can do, but it's okay, because instead, today we have with us Matt Boedy. He is a returning guest, and he is a professor at the University of North Georgia and a leading scholar of Christian nationalism and religious rhetoric and politics. He's also the author of The Seven Mountains Mandate, a book that traces how a once fringe theological idea about taking control of key areas of society became a practical roadmap for political organizing and cultural power. And today we're going to talk to Mr. Matthew about all things TPUSA, Charlie Kirk, and if we have time, maybe Candace Owens. So welcome back to the show, Matthew.
Oh,
yeah. So just to kind of jump right in, you wrote this book, Seventh Mountain Mandate, released October last year?
September 30th was the official date, but in the middle of September, people received copies. So
yeah, and not. I can't remember the timing, but not soon before or after Charlie Kirk had passed away. He was shot.
Yeah, Charlie was shot on September the 10th, and some people had gotten the book by then, so right around that time.
Yeah, so I'd love for you just to kind of, I don't know, just like what was going through your mind? I mean, because I don't know if classifying your book Seven Mountain as a uniquely TPUSA centered book would be accurate, but there are obviously references and mentions and stuff like that. But I'd love, like, what was going through your mind?
No, I would say that Charlie and Turning Point are central characters in the book, if you want to use a fiction metaphor, certainly. You know, I've been writing and kind of following Turning Point for a while, so not every day is dedicated to Turning Point. And so when I have classes that I teach, try not to pay attention to it. So that particular day was a class day. It actually was a student conference week day that very few students had signed up for. So I was kind of just, hanging out, reading some books, scrolling the internet, and I get a text from my wife saying that Charlie had been shot, because I had not seen it yet. And, I think I knew right away just the type of events that he has, open air, big crowds, and it wasn't just a shot rang out that he particularly was shot. So I knew that was going to be bad. And so I tried to rush home, and on the way home, so within 20 or 8 minutes, they'd announced that he was dead. That was difficult for me, A, because I was driving, and B, I think that just, the personal of following him and following his organization, but also the nature of his death, it certainly for several days and several weeks, I think, was very difficult for lots of people for different reasons. And I think that I choked up because I understood the gravity of gun violence, but also we haven't had that type of event, like that, a non-politician just at a speaking event shot in quite some time. So it was, to me, a really dangerous moment.
And, how much did you think about, sort of your book, the impact, and because of just the time that we live in, and of course, like the way that Charlie Kirk died, the risk of political violence, like to yourself or to your family?
My family mentioned that. I think they were more concerned than I was, and to be honest with you, I don't see myself as having that high of a profile. And the publisher, great publisher at Westminster, John Express, is a niche religious publisher. So while they were marketing the book to many different audiences, it still had not gotten very far in terms of national recognition. That did change there on the day of assassination. And I think for me, because I often tell people I work at a school that nobody has heard of, and I didn't, it's not as hard to find my email, but I don't have the same profile. So I wasn't concerned about that. I mean, I've gotten emails in the past that were pretty terrible, but I think that for me, it wasn't so much being paranoid of being around or open spaces or anything like that. It's just that I thought that people would connect my book with the assassin. So that we would learn about the assassin. He killed Charlie for these political reasons or for his plan. He didn't like his plan to take over America. And look, there's a book right there about this plan to take over America. So that has not happened, mainly because we haven't learned a whole lot about the assassin. But I just didn't want that to happen. I didn't want my book associated with the assassin as much as it has now become associated with the assassination.
Oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that, as if if there was a manifesto or something where your book was quoted.
Yeah, I don't think the young man has read my book, but I didn't want any association with it.
Guys, so before we talk about just TPUSA kind of as an organization and some of the things they've done post Charlie Kirk's death, how should people understand Charlie Kirk? And I know this is maybe we'll be walking on eggshells, because we also want to respect sort of the life that he lived, the family he lives behind. Yeah. So we want to make sure that we're not saying anything that's untrue. So how should people really kind of understand who Charlie Kirk is?
I do start often saying that people have these really quick ID, things. He was a podcaster. No, he was way more than that. He was a political operative, yes, but he was also way more than that. I think that he was not just a talking head. He was a organizer. I mean, he ran a $150 million organization with 300 employees. And I think that if you saw him as a political youth organizer, I can go with that. But the book lays out he's much more involved in that. I think also that, yes, he was a Trump whisperer. He translated Trump to evangelicals. He organized different ages and genders and demographics of people to vote. He played a role in a lot of different conversations that we've seen since his death. Those conversations sort of have fractured. But I think that if you try to sum up, kind of the obituary style of his life, I think you describe him as a conservative political leader. He tried to, frame himself as a thought leader too. I don't think we got quite there. They don't put him in a conservative thinker realm. But I do think that he played a large role, because of Turning Point, in our national, political, and social conversations.
So what is Turning Point? I mean, you go to their website, or in the funeral, or I forgot what they're called. But anyways, in the place where Erica Kirk and Trump and all the other folks were there, one could probably easily imagine that Turning Point was some sort of huge religious organization, because there's a lot of worship music, pastors and stuff. So what is Turning Point?
I describe it basically as a Christian nationalism mega organization. And it's not just one. You think of an organization, I use the word mega because it has so many arms in it, and not just the youth part or not just the religion part. It is, if you think of Christian nationalism as a cultural wide political movement, then it is the indispensable organization for Christian nationalism. It was the indispensable organization for conservative causes more broadly in a lot of different ways. It was involved in every area of our culture. So yes, it certainly had the religious part and the political part and the youth part, but there are many other areas that it plays a significant role in. Like you said, Turning Point itself is $100 million. Turning Point Action's probably another $50 million. And Charlie has said at times, he was a boss of 300, 400 people at a large, sprawling headquarters in Arizona. But just think of it this way: they just got a $10 million donation to rename the building, for the donor. So they play at a very high level, both nationally and locally. They do a lot.
But is TPUSA what did it? Did it always start kind of as a youth organizing religious, charity or organization?
Yeah, I mean, it's a 501c3. So, yeah, it's a nonprofit political arm. It didn't certainly start as a Christian nationalism organization. It started as a youth organizing movement. I mean, that's what Charlie was when he graduated high school. And, he organized conservatives in high school and college against what he saw were large, liberal leftist indoctrination policies and ideas. And I think that his energy, his age, he was in his 20s for a long time, yes, contributed that. I mean, it was a conservative organization. It hated big government. It was a pro-Second Amendment. It obviously hated higher education. So those were its mainstay issues for a while. It did not get involved in the culture war that, as we would describe it. It specifically stayed away from several issues like abortion. Then it switched. So as the story in the book says, basically in 2019-ish, when Charlie Kirk met a pastor named Rob McCoy and learned from him this idea of Christian nationalism and the Seven Mountains Mandate, he turned Turning Point into that ideology, into that realm, so much that now there's an arm of Turning Point for each of the 7 cultural areas that represented by the mountains. So once it did that, it expanded from a youth organization that had thousands of followers and on social media and chapters in high school and college. But now it covers all ages. And of course, it gets big donors and small donors. It has entertainment arms. It has news arms. There's a lot of things that it does. It reaches all parts of, we'll say, people that claim as conservatives and wants to reach more. So it did turn into Christian nationalism probably for the last 5 years.
And is TPUSA like a personality-driven type of organization? Like when I think of Trumpism needs Trump, right?
Yeah, right.
Trump, no Trumpism. So like is Turning Point USA kind of similar? Like the fact that Charlie Kirk is gone, like how has the organization changed, moved, or has it really done much of anything?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's a question that the Turning Point's trying to answer now. It certainly was in the beginning personality-driven because Charlie Kirk was its only employee for several years. But I think that once it expanded into all these areas and they pushed their millions of dollars into funding all these areas and hiring different types of people, it became more than just Charlie. There were other people associated with it. He obviously had the highest profile. But now that he's gone, it's branding itself as a movement. And I think it was kind of doing that before. But really what it was doing before was trying to set up Turning Point as the indispensable organization for a post-Trump America, for a post-MAGA America. It was going to be the organization that MAGA would come to once Trump leaves the scene, when that is. I mean, this takes very directly that Turning Point's already endorsed J.D. Vance for president, 2 years out. So it was trying to be that indispensable organization for everything. And that's why it expanded in all these areas. So that said, I think that, yes, it lost its founder, it lost its face. But because of all that it was doing before and all these areas that it was involved in, I do think it's built to last. And also, it can rightly describe itself as a movement. It is certainly a movement of young people. They have exploded in interest and growth and chapters since his death. Now, that may fade over time, but that people are coming to it with, I want to do this for Charlie, implies a certain movement based upon his life or his ideals or his vision or whatever it is you want to call it. But also, I think that replacing him with the ideals and vision, right? And that's sort of what they're trying to do. I mean, Erica said, we're going to implement Charlie's vision. He had this all written down for several years in a row, but we're going to try to put his ideas to practice. Again, they sell T-shirts, "We are all Charlie Kirk." So I think that is exactly what they're trying to do. And we'll see how successful they are with these tours that they're restarting, because that's their bread and butter, these college tours.
Is TPUSA kind of like supplanting what Liberty College used to kind of be for young conservatives? Because it seems like, I mean, with everything that happened at Liberty and presidents aren't necessarily going there to give speeches anymore. That's just right in our backyard here in Virginia. Like, I'm just curious, like, how does TPUSA sort of like compete? That's probably not the right word, but like, compare.
Well, yeah, I think that you're naming one particular group that's done one of these areas. Liberty University, obviously education area. Heritage Foundation does politics and perhaps some other areas, but Turning Point tries to do all 7 of these cultural areas at once. So I don't necessarily their competition. They obviously are partnering in a lot of different ways. But if you think about, Charlie Kirk started a think tank, if you will, at Liberty, and Liberty, after Falwell left, went in a different direction. But they were they didn't fire Charlie. They said, he's moving on. But I think he learned a lot from that kind of relationship. He learned how to start TPESA Academy and what to do in education. So I think that if Liberty University was set up as the Harvard for evangelicals or Harvard for conservatives as a school, then Turning Point is setting itself up as the indispensable organization for everything you can think of in terms of culture. They literally run schools now, and they have curriculum, and they started a program for, I forget the actual name of it, but they started a program for gap year kids. Come spend a year with Turning Point, learning from our experts, going to running our events during your year between high school and college. I can't think of a more Liberty University setup than that.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy. So after Charlie Kirk died, it was crazy in this country. Like, I'm sure I don't need to tell you, but it's like one of the things that struck me the most, and I know this is something that you've written about and I've posted about on social media, is a lot of these dedications or memorials to Charlie Kirk in some form or fashion. And everybody grieves differently. I get that, but it seems like there's just something about Charlie Kirk that really sort of awoke somebody or woke something up in people where they're like, okay, this person's gone. He represented something that we have to now memorialize. Like where do you think that comes from, and kind of what is this like mythologizing of Charlie Kirk, and kind of where does it come from?
I don't want this to sound negative, toward Charlie, but if your ideology is based upon victimhood and persecution and grievance, and then you actually have a victim, gunshot victim like Charlie, you're going to mythologize him. You can imagine if we had lost President Trump in Pennsylvania, that's on steroids of the story I'm talking about. But if your ideology is based upon grievance and victimhood and persecution and being misunderstood and all those things, and then you have the leader of your organization shot because of that, you're going to make him a martyr. You can imagine if he had survived, like President Trump had survived, right? In many ways, the martyrdom obviously wouldn't have happened, but still you would have mythologized that moment, much like they did with Pennsylvania. So if your entire, cause is they're trying to kill us, and they now have, and they is really important here because this kind of vague sense that they brought in after Pennsylvania, that's going to happen. So however great of a husband and great of a father and leader and whatever you want to call him, and he certainly could be all those things, the martyrdom requires a narrative, a story, not just the death, but of his life. It requires a sainthood kind of a thing, much like we see in Catholic Church becoming saints. It requires all that. And it requires a following. Obviously in the Catholic Church, it requires a certain amount of miracles. I don't think we've seen those yet. But it does require this narrative being built up around him, both word-based and visual-based. And so you can see every time they say, we're doing this for Charlie, it extends that story.
That's interesting. I've never really kind of thought about it like in the story context, because like whenever you think of Christian nationalism, and especially depending on kind of like whose definition you're applying, like, but if you apply like the Perry Whitehead definition where they view it as like a cultural framework, which is just like a bunch of stories, right? Then like Charlie Kirk's legacy is like just one element in kind of the larger framework, which kind of leads me to ask, like, so how does or how have you seen his martyrdom play into the Christian nationalist narrative as they, as TPUSA, pushes events like, what was the thing I saw the other day? Like, make heaven crowded.
That's the name of their new tour. Yes.
Yeah. So how does his martyrdom kind of play into sort of broader Christian nationalism themes that you've been seeing?
One, whatever Turning Point is doing and whatever chapters they're starting and whatever people they're encouraging to act, they're all saying they're doing it for Charlie. So whether it is start a chapter or pass a policy or fight back against the libs, it is very much doing it for Charlie. So how long that energy lasts, I don't know. I mean, I still think, obviously, we're 4 months afterwards, and it's still much of a grieving process, both for the people that worked there and for many other people. But I do think that they're trying to make him a presence in everything that they do. Obviously, he was very much a presence at their Amfest that they had in December. Literally, they rebuilt the tent in which he was shot under, and you could go take selfies in front of it. And they have his pictures everywhere, and they talked about him a lot. I think that they have to extend that, as into the next year, so that people will remember what they do things for. If you think about Christian scriptures and remembering and all the stories we tell and why we do stuff, the why is really important. And so this is very similar. And this is on parallel on purpose. They are trying to be a religious organization who lost a religious figure. So they're going to keep that person going much in the same manners that we would, do with any type of religious figure that we've ever heard of.
Have you seen any of their advocacy or outreach address like maybe some of the root causes of Charlie Kirk's death? So whether it's, whether you attribute the root cause to gun violence or you attribute the root cause to political violence or the way that we talk to each other, because one would think as a Christian organization, and I'm making a lot of assumptions here, that, okay, our founder got shot. We are going to do a full court blitz on loving and showing people grace and just talking to them about,
they have said that Charlie was shot for debating or talking to people or having open conversations and dialogue. They have also said, and specifically Erica, I think, said it during her eulogy, that they, meaning satanic forces, demonic forces, killed Charlie Kirk. We're not going to let the devil win if we, don't act in Charlie's name. So that obviously implies, that the devil did it. So we have both of those going on. We have a promotion by Turning Point. I think at the memorial service, they were introduced to America in a much broader sense for the first time. Many people were introduced to them for the first time. So they permitted themselves as a Christian organization, from the get-go. We have Matthew West singing. We have a bunch of worship songs that people know, and it looks like a funeral. So they were doing that, but at the same time, they're also doing this thing that we heard a lot about, from Butler, Pennsylvania. I think that Turning Point learned from that incident to establish the they pretty quickly and to make it not just about the individual. We have not learned a lot about the individual, and I think, that's good for Turning Point and good in the sense of their marketing. They do want an open trial for various reasons, but I think also what they're trying to promote now is the more of a, I don't say positive in sense of that, but they're trying to promote themselves as opposed to promote what they're against. I mean, we used to think of Turning Point as being against all the things that I listed before, all the isms and ideologies that Trump is fighting. But I think now that they have a moment with the broader public, they've been trying to promote it as faith, family, and freedom. And they get away from that at times, but I really think they're trying, they really have a story to tell about themselves now that they didn't perhaps before.
Did Erica Kirk have an active role with TPUSA prior to Kirk's death or Charlie Kirk's death?
I mean, she certainly had spoken at some of their women's events. She was the keynote speaker at some of these, women's leadership summits. She had appeared on Charlie Kirk's podcast for a while, and they talked marriage and their own marriage. But, I think once she had the second child, certainly was not as involved before when she only had one or even before that. But certainly she was well known to Turning Point staff and people in Arizona. She certainly, if you want to say behind the scenes, you want to use that phrase, it's fine. But she was never a paid staff member, but certainly talked about things with Charlie, and I think that's why he chose her as the CEO. She was the CEO of a streetwear company that she started before she met Charlie Kirk. I think she passed that off when she got married. She had been working on a couple of different degrees, one from Liberty, and I think she had paused that when she got married as well. So she has some experience in what she's doing, but no, I don't think she was not a radio host or a podcast host or anything like that.
Got it. And did Vance know Charlie Kirk well? Because I know like he hosted his podcast or something.
Yeah, like the day after. Yeah, from what we read in media, that Trump or Charlie Kirk helped introduce J.D. Vance to Trump. As the vice presidential contender, convinced him to choose him. Vance had been a senator from Ohio and kind of involved in Trump world, but kind of not for a while. But his, what do they call it? The national Catholicism, or this, Christian nationalism version of Catholicism, connected him to Charlie pretty quickly after that. So yeah, they knew each other for some time before that.
The other thing that happened after his death was a lot of pastors seemed like they had a decision to make the following Sunday on whether or not to address the assassination or be branded heretics. It seemed like in some of the reporting I read. I love to just help me understand like that element, like the desire to want to. I don't want to say memorialize, but just to address that particular death and not the other death of the Dobson guy, who I think died like a month prior.
Oh, James Dobson.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
With James Dobson, obviously he's pretty old, so you certainly could memorialize him at any point, not just the week after he died. I think that, Charlie was killed on a Tuesday, and I'm sure Josh could tell you, right, the day during the week in which the service schedule is shut down and we're ready to go, right? It's probably Wednesday. And so how you insert in something that's already there is interesting. But I think also, and I can tell you, my church experience on that Sunday as well, but when I talk to groups of people, and they're mainly Christian people, sometimes, community groups, I always ask how many people knew of Charlie Kirk before his death, and maybe a third, maybe a quarter of the people had done. So I'm thinking that if you're a pastor of an average American church, you don't think your congregation knows who Charlie Kirk was. So you have to explain to them who he was and that he was shot, and then perhaps, why that is important to talk about, and that you're already minutes into a service. And so I think that most people chose not to mention it. In the church that I was in, it's a Baptist church, and they mentioned it during the pastoral prayer, and mentioned also the Minnesota lawmaker who'd been assassinated and the one that'd been shot. I forget how many weeks before that, and mentioning we're against all violence, blah, blah, blah. So I think if you were going to do something and you didn't want to have to explain who Charlie Kirk was, you probably would make a list of all gun violence and then say we're, against that. So I think that Turning Point likes to draw those lines between, as they say, cowards and not. And they have many pastors in the pulpits who support them, and many people who did way more than that. But I think that most pastors think, well, I didn't even know who he was, or maybe my congregation didn't know who he was. So it's pretty easy to not talk about him then.
Yeah, and it also seems like TPUSA is very passionate about like free speech, First Amendment, stuff like that. But sometimes their actions tell a completely different story. And this is a point I brought up. We interviewed Nadine Strawson recently, who was president of the ACLU for like 20 years, works at senior fellow at FIRE. And we were talking about First Amendment and just free speech on campuses, like how both like the left and the right, like love to protect their own speech, but shoot down, the other speech. So like, help me better understand, like, how does TPUSA, sort of approach the free speech issue and when some of their own actions don't seem to comport with?
Yeah, I would not classify Turning Point and Charlie as a free speech supporter, as a supporter of the First Amendment. Now, they use the opportunities or use the rights available to them under the First Amendment to talk on college campuses, but did not make that opportunity an advancement, an argument for free speech. They used it to advance their own agenda. So I think they used it. And of course, if you ever have seen any of their videos from their campus visits, it is not a very nice set of things where they videotape people who have these odd, strange questions or can't really articulate themselves. Charlie sometimes listens to them, sometimes he doesn't, sometimes he makes fun of them, but sometimes the video itself makes fun of them. And they often choose the most outrageous examples of different things. And then, put it up on the video. It says Charlie Burns or Charlie Schools, TP, liberal person in pink hair, whatever, something like that. So I would not say that they were a supporter of the First Amendment. They did not want everyone to have speech. They harassed people and ambushed people for that very reason, and several examples that I write about in the book. But I think that they promoted themselves early on as a free speech First Amendment group because it got them on campus. And then anytime someone questioned that or says you can't have a table here or you can't do X, Y, and Z when they could, they would have that content on video available very quickly. And they are really good about knowing the law, where even some university administrators are not. So that got them a higher profile. They used it as a jumping off point to sell their own thing. So I think that, they're most famous for back in the day, they would have a big ball, mini sized beach ball that you could write stuff, a free speech ball, and everybody could write anything they want. And if you want to say that's free speech, but at the same time, they were using that to point out all the stupid stuff that was written on it.
Interesting. So can you give us some examples of like how they have, or people within TPUSA have shut down other type of speech that they didn't like?
Well, I think the most famous example is the ambush they did of the Arizona State University professor who writes about drag shows and who is, I forget what particular gender he calls himself by, but he's a male professor. And so he was coming out of a class or of a building on the campus of Arizona State, and a TPUSA, we'll say news crew, a cameraman and a person go up to him and try to get him to talk about his research or his writings, but really it is an aggressive type of questions. Why are you trying to indoctrinate? Why are you spreading this poison? That sort of thing. And they kept following him down the street and kept trying to talk with him, and he keeps trying to walk away. And eventually it became physical. And I tried to use that phrase because they were arrested and charged with a series of crimes that they, I think, pleaded no contest to because the Arizona State professor ended up on the ground. And this type of okay, you're welcome to ask questions, but eventually you just say, okay, he's not going to answer, and you walk away. But it's very aggressive. And of course, they use the whole video sense to suggest that the professor was against free speech, that he didn't want to talk about it and he didn't want to be transparent, blah, blah, blah. But what you're really doing is trying to stop him from doing what he's doing. You're trying to stop him from teaching what he wants to teach. I mean, that is not a great defender of free speech to use free speech against someone.
Yeah, that's right. And there's a really great book called The Calling of the American Mind, which written by, I think it's Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt. And
Right.
They go on in a lot more detail, not necessarily TPUSA, but just kind of on the topic of free speech. Like it's something that everybody is a big proponent of until, you say something that other people don't like. So,
Right. I mean, of course, we could talk about the number of people that were fired from their jobs, both government and educational, for posting stuff on social media. Now, Turning Point necessarily didn't do that, but people who supported them thought that's what they wanted.
yeah, I mean, there were quite a few Trump influencers that were full court press. Anybody that would post anything on social media or, TikTok or whatever, I didn't like Charlie Kirk, and then they
Right.
get blasted and doxxed and all kinds of other stuff. And it just doesn't make sense. It's frustrating, actually, because it's okay, if you are going to advocate for free speech, okay, TPUSA, where are you? You should extend the same kind of grace that you've been asking for. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Erica Kirk said in an interview that, she would forgive the shooter.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you would think that would extend kind of, much further in TPUSA. I don't know. What do you think? Oh, why is there a disconnect?
I think that if you think of free speech, as being free from government oversight or government punishment, there was a lot of government people firing their workers to honor Turning Point. So there's that. In terms of forgiving the killer, right, we also have Erica saying she wants an open trial. Now, she hasn't said directly that she wants this person convicted and put to death. the senator from Utah, who is a friend of Turning Point, has said that. So, I think that with any type of debate about the death penalty in Christian circles, there's the I personally can forgive, but I want the state to do its job part. So they don't see that as a contradiction.
Yeah. So I have to ask, what's going on with Candace Owens? And
my eyebrows are raised if you're not watching this on video, right?
Candace Owens and Erica Kirk, and I don't really know. I mean, like aliens or time travel. Like help me.
That's the most recent. I mean, yeah. There's God. Well, I do think that with any type of influencer gone mad, and she has a large audience, Candace. I forget how many millions. It's much larger than any person at Turning Point, even Charlie when he was alive. You do have to keep your audience interested. And so she has laid out a series of claims, unfounded, exaggerated, bizarre, about the death of Charlie Kirk, what Turning Point did or didn't do, both before and after, and now, financial records. There's a strange thing about an Egyptian plane, I think. I'm just trying to list all the things just so everybody would know. If you don't follow, I don't normally watch your, show, just following it, what people post. And so if you don't know, Candace Owens used to work for Turning Point and was pushed out mainly because she made pro-Hitler comments several years ago and then went on a series of different, platforms. Daily Wire has her own show. And many of her earliest supporters have denounced her because of her anti-Semitic stuff. And so you have to ask yourself who was listening to her now. And she's only grown in audience. I cannot fathom. So your question is what's going on with her? She seems to be gathering more and more people to her. And I don't know why. And eventually, of course, you think you could ignore it, but Turning Point had to address it at some point, with this meeting between her and Erica, and then Erica mentioning it indirectly during the CBS interview, the town hall that she did, or was it the New York Times thing? But anyway, stop doing these things. And of course, Candace didn't stop. Honestly, I do compare it to just some of the crazy stuff that the president says. And so you ask yourself, then why is he still so popular? It's because it as stupid and crazy as it is, it comes across as authentically, I'm trying to get to the truth, right? I'm just asking questions. No one else is asking these questions. I'm the only one doing. I'm sacrificing my reputation for everybody. And people seem to think that's a good one.
Years from now, we will come to find out that the reason Candace Owens is saying all kinds of crazy stuff is because she was snubbed for her Nobel Peace Prize. I'm sure.
Well, for a lot of things.
So, I mean, if Trump can invade Greenland because he didn't get a Nobel Peace Prize, I mean, who knows what no peace prize can do to a person. One can only imagine. All right, seriously. But I am curious, just a few more questions for you about Christian nationalism and TPUSA's role in it. Like, in what ways are you seeing TPUSA grow Christian nationalism, both, in the organization and kind of in the country as a whole?
I mean, you mentioned the Make Heaven Crowded tour. These tours are really important for bringing together all stripes of Christians in some sort of a worship moment, and to say that we can be united, which is the idea behind Christian nationalism. There should be some sort of Christian consensus in our culture led by the majority of Christians. So those things are really important. And they did a lot during the election year of 2024, but now to do them again, I think with just we'll say religion as its center is really important. But also I think that in churches around the nation, they are training people to not just run for office or talk to their school board about curriculum or books or anything like that, but really trying to impose a larger cultural Christianity on the rest of us through the things that I just mentioned, but also kind of conversations you would have with your neighbor. It is a persuasion campaign in some ways, and that's what Turning Point breeds itself as, is that, we want to talk with you, we want to debate you. But I think also because it's growing in this kind of martyrdom rhetoric, right? We're doing this for Charlie. They've given divine stamp to anything that they do. They were going to do it for Charlie. We're not going to stop. We're not going to slow down. They've tried to kill us, blah, blah, blah. So I do think that the nationalism part is really becoming more important. Now, they don't use that term. They don't call themselves Christian nationalism. But what they're doing is they're expanding on all the other groups we have seen in the past do Christian nationalism before it was called that. I mean, Jared Falwell, More Majority, Ralph Reed, Christian Coalition, they're taking it to the next step by expanding it in so many ways and making it much more aggressive. And I think that if you combine the martyrdom rhetoric with the political, win or lose, we have to win thing. I mean, those two streams will come together either in the J.D. Vance presidential election or some point where there's just no way to convince them otherwise. So we have a large group of people who will not turn around.
So you really think that TPUSA is going to continue to endorse Vance like in 28 if he runs?
Yeah, I mean they're already doing that. I think that they chose him for that reason. Obviously, he's very close to Charlie, but I think that they're trying to set themselves up as the indispensable organization. So already choosing a candidate and making it a succession of Trump. Automatically these are the people we want. But I think also that Turning Point, if it's going to be described as a movement, if it's going to be described as less than a personality-based organization, it needs to show that it has a national movement behind it. So it's partnering with all these different people. It's obviously going to affect elections, but they have to keep doing what it is they're doing to show that they are that movement.
That makes sense. So if we were to fast forward, I don't know, like 2 or 3 years from now, maybe it's right after the election and we have a new president. What kinds of things do you predict TPUSA will be doing, and or how embedded with the government do you think they will be or would want to be?
I think a couple of things. One, it obviously depends on who would win. Let's just say that their candidate wins, right? They have set themselves up as if Charlie was a kingmaker, now the organization itself is a kingmaker. So their pipeline of people from high school graduates and college graduates or people that have been in their group for a while, they're going to flood the government. In much ways that we've seen law schools get clerks into justices' roles and then on and on. Turning Point has a pipeline of people now because they've been around long enough that they could become advisors to a J.D. Vance administration. That certainly could happen. But also if they play a big enough role as they have in the past and continue that, really what they're setting themselves up as is that cultural enforcement of the government's ideals. And that's what Charlie Kirk described the church as in the Seven Mountains Mandate. It was the command center for this cultural Christianity that they want to impose on the rest of us. So Turning Point would be that organization. I mean, there are obviously thousands of churches around the nation, and they're going to partner with them, but really they're bringing them together under a Turning Point tent. So you can see that, yes, it does depend on whether or not they win, but if they lose, they're the anti-empire, anti-tyranny, anti-whatever group now. They really could go either way.
Oh, interesting. So it's almost like if Vance wins and he's their chosen candidate, that's going to be a catalyst to their sort of kingmaker status, which is going to increase recruitment, all that kind of stuff. But if they lose, they can still sort of be like, yeah, down with the man kind of thing. We didn't like him anyways kind of thing.
Right. I mean, that's what they did during the Biden administration. It really helped them. So I would suspect that would be the same route they would take now.
That's so interesting. I mean, like I know that TPUSA already endorsed Vance, which, I mean, do they endorse him through their action fund? Because as a 501c3, I thought you can't
well, yeah. So the Turning Point USA is the 501c3, but Turning Point Action is the 501c. I forget the number, but it's we can directly endorse candidates and give them money. So Vance isn't on a ballot yet, so they can't necessarily give him money, but they can fund all those candidates that he wants, or they can raise money for any of the state parties. They're basically taking over the Republican Party in terms of raising money and knocking on doors anyway. So, yeah, they have a direct political arm, and they've already made endorsements for this coming midterm election, both at the congressional level and the governor level. So they're choosing candidates they're going to win. Some of these races are gerrymandered and things like that. So they're not taking a lot of risk in endorsing J.D. Vance 2 years out, but at the same time they know what they're good at.
That's so interesting because yeah, I mean, like, because they have an entire like organizing infrastructure.
Yes.
So I mean, I'd assume that's going to be massive for fans. And I don't know,
they're hiring people to knock on doors in Nevada and New Hampshire, along with Arizona and Wisconsin and Georgia. So they've picked Nevada and New Hampshire because they believe they could make inroads there. Certainly Nevada, yeah.
Really? Wow, that is so great. So their main office is based in Arizona. Right?
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
But they're mobilizing to some of these other states where they think the soil might be fertile enough to plant something.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they have, again, chapters in churches, chapters in high school, chapters in colleges, but now they also have, they call them activism hubs, but basically they're county chapters, right? Like the GOP would have a Chatham County or a Morris County chapter or whatever, but the Turning Point would also have a similar group. Like that. And not in every county, but in larger than enough so they would have come to our county meeting. Yeah, so they are a political party that also has dreams of cultural integration.
So wild. What else are you studying or writing these days, Matthew? I mean, you've been doing a whirlwind of media tours.
Yeah, try to do that and focusing on Christian nationalism. You started a Substack to try to, connect Charlie Kirk to things that are going on in the world and what Turning Point is doing. And I think also I'm trying to advocate for higher education policies that, the Trump administration is attacking.
That's all good things. And so yeah, definitely keep us in your thoughts. If we can help you in any way, your book, Seven Mountain Mandate, is a phenomenal read. I'll make sure I put the link in the show notes again. But thank you again, Matthew, for everything. Really appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
And to our listeners and watchers, thanks again for stopping by. And as always, keep your conversations not right or left, but up. We'll see you next time. Take care.